The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the two ambassadors entered from opposite doors. On the left came High Commander Zethrak of the Vornix Empire, his purple scales gleaming under the lights, his four arms folded across his chest in a display of controlled anger. On the right came Supreme Matriarch Yelona of the Kethari Collective, her silver fur standing on end, her three eyes blazing with cold fury. They had been at war for 300 years. Between them stood a single human woman. Ambassador Sarah Chen was small compared to the massive aliens on either side. She wore a simple blue suit and carried nothing but a tablet and a worn leather bag. The other council members watched from their elevated seats, many already preparing their final reports. This was the 47th attempt at peace talks. Every previous attempt had failed within the first hour. "This is waste of time," Zethrak growled, his translator device rendering his words in flat tones that still carried his contempt. "The Kethari murdered 3 billion of our people at Vorn Prime. They will never offer enough to balance that debt. The Vornix started the war when they destroyed our colony ships," Yelona hissed back. 2 million families, including children, burned in space. Your people deserve everything that has happened since. The Galactic Council representative, a tall being made of living crystal, raised one arm. "Ambassador Chen, the Council has granted humanity's request to mediate these talks. You have 3 standard days. Do you understand that failure means the Council will withdraw all support from both parties?" Sarah nodded. "I understand, Council Representative Shira. I thank you for this opportunity." "Opportunity?" Zethrak laughed, a harsh sound. "Human, your species has been in space for only 200 years. You have never fought a real war. What could you possibly know about ending one?" Sarah looked up at the massive Vornix commander. She smiled, but there was something in her eyes that made several council members shift uncomfortably. "We've fought plenty of wars, Commander. We just learned to fight them differently." She turned to face both ambassadors and spoke in a calm voice. "Before we begin, I have a simple request. I would like both of you to join me for a meal." The chamber went quiet again, but this time it was confusion, not anticipation. Yelona's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. "A meal? This is a peace negotiation, not a social gathering." "I know," Sarah said, "but I've found that it's hard to truly hate someone you've shared food with. It's an old human tradition. We call it breaking bread together." Zethrak shook his massive head. "I will not eat with a Kethari. Their very presence makes me ill." "That's actually perfect," Sarah said, reaching into her leather bag. "Because I brought food from Earth. Neither of you has tried human cuisine before, correct?" Both ambassadors confirmed they had not. Sarah pulled out several sealed containers. "These dishes represent different cultures from my homeworld. I thought we could try them together. Consider it a diplomatic exercise." Council Representative Shira leaned forward. "Ambassador Chen, I must ask, is this standard human diplomatic procedure?" "It's one of many techniques we use," Sarah replied. "You see, humans believe that enemies who eat together become less likely to kill each other. It creates what we call a shared experience." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. The Vornix and Kethari had never shared anything except hatred and violence. But Ambassador Chen was already setting up a small table in the center of the chamber, arranging the containers with careful precision. "I have prepared dishes that both your species can safely consume," she continued. "My team spent 6 months researching your biology to ensure nothing would cause harm. The Vornix will find our spicy foods interesting. The Kethari might enjoy our sweeter dishes." Yelona moved closer, her curiosity winning against her anger for a moment. "You spent 6 months preparing food for a negotiation." "We spent 6 months preparing for you," Sarah corrected. "The food is just the beginning." Slowly, reluctantly, the 2 ambassadors approached the table. Sarah offered them chairs specifically designed for their bodies. They sat, keeping as much distance as possible while still being at the same table. The council watched in fascination. Sarah opened the first container, releasing a warm, rich smell into the chamber. This is something we call curry. It comes from a region of Earth called India. The people there have been making it for thousands of years. She served small portions to each ambassador. Zethrak sniffed it suspiciously. It smells like fire. It is spicy, Sarah admitted, but I think you will find it interesting. The Vorniks have a higher tolerance for heat than most species. Zethrak took a careful bite. His purple scales shifted color slightly, moving toward blue. Among his people, this indicated surprise. This is acceptable. Yelona tried hers more cautiously. Her silver fur rippled. The flavors are complex. I taste many ingredients working together. That's the secret of good curry, Sarah said. Many different things all mixed together, creating something better than any single ingredient could be alone. She let that statement hang in the air as she opened another container. For the next hour, Ambassador Chen served dish after dish. There was sweet chocolate from Africa, sour pickled vegetables from Korea, savory cheese from France, and simple bread from dozens of cultures. She explained each one, telling stories of the humans who had created these foods, often during times of great hardship. This bread recipe survived a great war on Earth, she said, offering a dark, dense loaf. The people who made it were starving, but they shared what little they had with their neighbors, even their enemies. Zethrak paused mid-bite. They fed their enemies. Some did. They believed that hunger was a worse enemy than the people they were fighting. They were often right. Yelona set down her utensil. Human, are you trying to teach us something with these stories? Sarah met her three-eyed gaze directly. I'm trying to show you that hatred is a choice. It's not something that must be. On Earth, we have a saying, enemies today, friends tomorrow. It sounds simple, but it took us thousands of years and millions of deaths to learn it. The meal continued. The council members noticed something strange happening. The two ambassadors who had entered the chamber refusing to even look at each other were now sitting closer together. They were not friendly, not yet, but the raw hatred seemed to have faded into something more like wary respect. When the food was finished, Sarah cleared the table. Thank you both for joining me. Tomorrow we will begin the actual negotiations, but first I have homework for you. Homework, Zethrak repeated, unfamiliar with the word. Sarah handed each ambassador a small device. These contain stories, fiction from Earth. I have selected tales that I believe will resonate with each of you. I ask that you read them tonight. Yelona examined the device. What kind of stories? Stories about enemies who became friends. Stories about forgiveness. Stories about choosing a different path. Sarah paused. And one story about two leaders who destroyed each other completely, leaving nothing but ashes for their children to inherit. The chamber was silent. Ambassador Chen gathered her things and headed for the door. She stopped and turned back. The meal tonight was the easy part. Tomorrow we discuss the dead. That will be much harder. I suggest you both rest well. She left the chamber. The two ambassadors remained at the table, neither willing to be the first to leave, neither quite willing to resume their argument. Something had shifted in the air between them, something small but real. Council Representative Shira made a note in the official record. Human Diplomatic Technique Number 1, Shared Meals. Effectiveness unknown but promising. The crystal being had observed thousands of negotiations over the centuries. This was the first time either ambassador had stayed in the room for more than an hour. The next morning arrived with neither ambassador having slept much. Sarah Chen found them already waiting in the chamber, their faces showing exhaustion and something else. She recognized it immediately. They had read the stories. The Tale of the Two Kingdoms, Yelona said without greeting. The one where both kings refuse to stop fighting until nothing remains. That was not subtle, Ambassador Chen. It wasn't meant to be, Sarah replied, setting up her workspace. Did it make you think? Zethrak's scales had shifted to a deeper purple, a color Sarah's research team had identified as thoughtfulness. The story about the soldier who crossed enemy lines to save a child, was that based on real events? Many of our stories are based on real events, Sarah said. Humans have been fighting and forgiving each other for a very long time. We have made every mistake possible. We have also found every possible path to peace. She activated her tablet and projected 2 images on the main screen. One showed a beautiful world covered in purple vegetation. The other showed a planet with silver oceans reflecting 3 moons. Both images had dates beneath them. Vorn Prime before the attack, Sarah said, pointing to the purple world. And Kethari Colony 7 before its destruction. I want you both to look at these images. Really look at them. The 2 ambassadors stared at the projections. Around the chamber, council members leaned forward. This was unexpected. These were homes, Sarah continued. Not military targets, not strategic positions. Homes. Families lived in these places. Children played there. Old ones rested there. Both of these places are gone now because of this war. Yelona's fur bristled. We did not start this conflict. I'm not interested in who started it, Sarah said, her voice still calm. I'm interested in who will finish it. Right now you are both losing. Every year more worlds burn. More children never get to grow up. More families are destroyed. And for what? She changed the projection. Now it showed casualty numbers updated in real time. The figures were staggering. Billions dead on both sides. Hundreds of worlds damaged or destroyed. Resources that could have built paradises wasted on weapons and death. This is the price of your war, Sarah said. I want you to really understand this number. It's not just a statistic. Each one represents a person who will never laugh again, never love again, never see another sunrise. Zethrak slammed one of his 4 hands on the table. You think we don't know this? You think we enjoy sending our people to die? I think you've forgotten that the enemy feels the same pain, Sarah replied. I think you've made them into monsters in your minds, because it's easier to kill monsters than people. She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. This contains letters, messages from ordinary citizens on both sides, parents who lost children, children who lost parents, soldiers who wish they had never picked up weapons. I've been collecting these for the past year. Yelona reached for the folder hesitantly. How did you get these? I asked, Sarah said simply. It turns out that most people, no matter their species, want the same things. They want their families safe. They want their children to have better lives than they did. They want peace. She paused. They also want someone to blame for their pain. She let them read some of the letters. The chamber remained silent as Zethrak and Yelona absorbed the words of their own people, words they had never been allowed to see. Letters full of grief and anger, but also exhaustion and desperate hope. Your governments filter what you see, Sarah explained. They show you only the enemy's cruelty, never their suffering. They remind you of your losses but never make you consider theirs. This is how wars continue long after everyone wants them to end. Council Representative Shira spoke up. Ambassador Chen, this is highly irregular. Diplomatic negotiations typically focus on strategic concerns, territorial agreements, resource allocation. Those things matter, Sarah agreed, but they can't be resolved until both sides see each other as people, not enemies, not monsters, people. She turned back to the ambassadors. I have another exercise for you. I want each of you to tell me about someone you lost in this war, not a number, a person, someone you cared about. The request hung in the air like a weight. Neither ambassador spoke for a long moment. Then slowly, Yelona began. My youngest sister, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Mayona. She was a healer, not a warrior. She went to the front lines to help the wounded. A Vornix raiding party found her medical station and destroyed it. They didn't check what it was. They just killed everyone inside. Zethrak's scales shifted through several colors. Then he spoke. My son, Kethrak, he was 17 years old when he died. His ship was ambushed near the border. The Kethari didn't take prisoners that day. They never do. Sarah nodded slowly. Now you know something about each other's pain. Mayona the healer, Kethrak the young soldier, both gone, both loved, both missed. She looked between them. What do you think Mayona would want you to do right now? Yelona's 3 eyes glistened. She would want me to heal this wound. And Kethrak? Zethrak was silent for a long moment. He always said the war was stupid, that there had to be a better way. I told him he was young and foolish. His voice cracked slightly. Perhaps he was the wise one. Sarah pulled out 2 more items from her bag. They were small boxes, each containing a holographic projector. She placed one in front of each ambassador. These are gifts from my government. They contain recordings of children from both your worlds, children asking for peace. We collected thousands of these messages. Every single child, no matter their species, said the same thing. They want to grow up without fear. The holograms activated. Small voices filled the chamber, speaking in Vornix and Kethari and many other languages. Children asking why their parents had to go to war. Children praying for the killing to stop. Children hoping that maybe this time someone would listen. Several council members turned away. The sounds of children pleading for peace was more powerful than any statistics or strategic arguments. This is your legacy, Sarah said. Not honor or glory or revenge. This is what you're really fighting over. Whether these children will have a future or whether they'll die in the same war that killed their parents. For the first time, both ambassadors were crying. It was different for each species. Yelona's silver fur darkened with moisture. Zethrak's scales released a thin, clear fluid, but the meaning was the same. How do we stop it? Zethrak asked, his voice rough. After everything, how can we possibly make peace? Sarah smiled, but it was sad. The same way you start any difficult journey, one step at a time, and you've just taken the first step. You've admitted that you want it to end. The chamber doors opened, and Sarah's assistant entered, pushing a cart. On it were 2 large objects covered with cloth. This is human diplomatic technique number 2, Sarah said. We call it the exchange of gifts. She removed the claws. The first object was a sculpture made from Vornix metals, shaped in the form of a Kethari greeting symbol. The second was woven from Kethari silk, depicting the Vornix symbol of home. Both were beautiful, intricate works that must have taken months to create. Artists from Earth made these, Sarah explained. They studied your cultures, learned your symbols and meanings, and created these as bridges between your worlds. We want you to take them home and display them where your people can see them. Yelona reached out and touched the silk weaving. This is the pattern of welcome, the one we use to greet honored guests. Yes, we thought it was appropriate for a new beginning. Zethrak examined the metal sculpture. The artisan understood our metalworking techniques. This is not simple copying. They truly learned our craft. He spent 3 years studying, Sarah said. He said it was the most important work of his life. The 2 ambassadors looked at each other. Something had changed between them. They were still enemies, still burdened by centuries of hatred and loss. But now there was a crack in that hatred, a small opening where something else might grow. Tomorrow, Sarah said, we discuss terms. But tonight, I want you both to do something difficult. I want you to imagine what peace would look like. Not what you would gain or lose, but what life would be like for your people if the war simply stopped. Can you do that? Both ambassadors nodded slowly. The session ended, and they left through their separate doors, each carrying their gift. Council Representative Shira approached Sarah after the others had gone. Ambassador Chen, I must admit I am impressed. I have never seen Vornix and Kethari tears before. I was not entirely sure they were capable of such emotion. Everyone is capable of grief, Sarah said, packing her bag. And everyone is tired of war eventually. You just have to help them remember why. The crystal being tilted their head. You have not yet discussed any actual terms. Territorial boundaries, reparations, military withdrawals. How will you resolve those issues with stories and food and artwork? Sarah smiled. Those issues are actually the easy part, representative. The hard part is getting people to want to solve them. Hate is comfortable. It gives meaning to suffering. Peace requires letting go of that meaning and finding a new one. That's what we're building here. She headed for the door, then paused. The real negotiation starts tomorrow. That's when we'll see if the seeds we've planted today will grow. She left the crystal being standing alone in the chamber, surrounded by the fatting holograms of children asking for peace. The third day began differently. When Ambassador Chen arrived at the chamber, she found Zethrak and Yelona already there, but not in their usual positions. They were standing near the center of the room, not together but closer than before. Neither was wearing their formal military decorations. They had dressed simply, like civilians rather than commanders. Ambassador Chen, Yelona said, we talked last night. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You talked to each other. Through secure channels, Zethrak confirmed. We did not discuss terms. We discussed what you asked us to imagine, what peace would look like. The other council members, who had been settling into their seats, went still. This was unprecedented. The two ambassadors had never voluntarily communicated outside of formal negotiations. Tell me what you imagined, Sarah said, taking her seat. Yelona spoke first. I imagine my people no longer counting their dead. I imagine young ones growing up without knowing the word for enemy. I imagine traders moving freely between our worlds, exchanging goods and ideas. Her voice softened. I imagined returning to the place where my sister died and building a healing center there in her name. Zethrak nodded slowly. I imagined my son's ship redesigned for exploration instead of war. I imagined Vornix and Kethari scientists working together to solve problems that neither species can solve alone. We have knowledge of deep space propulsion. They have knowledge of biological sciences. Together, we could do great things. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This was what she had hoped for, what she had worked toward for the past year of preparation. Those are beautiful visions. Now let's figure out how to make them real. She activated her tablet and displayed a map of the border region between the two empires. Hundreds of worlds were marked in red, the sites of major battles or ongoing disputes. I've studied your conflict for many months. I've identified the core issues that must be resolved for peace to be possible. There are three main categories: territory, reparations, and justice. Zethrak crossed his forearms. Justice, you mean punishment? Not exactly, Sarah said. I mean acknowledgement. Both sides have committed terrible acts during this war, atrocities that can never be undone. The question is not how to punish, but how to honor the victims while allowing the living to move forward. Yelona's fur rippled uncertainly. Our people demand that those responsible for the worst crimes be brought to trial. Anything less would be seen as betrayal. The same is true for my people, Zethrak said. The commanders who ordered the colony ship attacks are still alive. They are considered heroes. Sarah nodded. This is where human experience might be most useful. We have faced this problem many times. After our great wars, we developed something called truth and reconciliation processes. Let me explain how they work. She spent the next hour describing historical examples from Earth, times when humans had found ways to acknowledge past horrors without starting new cycles of violence. The council members listened with growing interest. These were techniques they had never encountered in any other species. The key insight, Sarah said, is that justice and peace sometimes require different approaches. Perfect justice would mean punishing everyone who ever hurt anyone, but that often just continues the cycle. What people really need is to have their suffering acknowledged and to know that it won't happen again. Yelena considered this. So rather than executing the Vornix commanders, we would require them to publicly acknowledge what they did and face the families of their victims. It's one option, Sarah agreed. There are many variations. The important thing is that both sides agree on the process before peace is declared. Otherwise, old wounds will fester and eventually break open again. They discussed justice for several more hours, gradually building a framework that both sides could accept. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't completely fair, but it was possible. That was what mattered. When they broke for a meal, Sarah noticed that Zethrak and Yelena sat at the same table without being asked. They weren't talking much, but they weren't glaring at each other either. Small progress, but real. Ambassador Chen, Council Representative Shira said, approaching her during the break. I must ask, how did you prepare for this negotiation? The level of understanding you have shown of both species is remarkable. Sarah smiled. I listened. For a full year before this negotiation, I traveled to both empires. I spoke with soldiers and civilians, leaders and workers, old ones and young ones. I learned their languages, their customs, their jokes, and their fears. I ate their food, attended their ceremonies, watched their children play. That must have been difficult. Neither empire is welcoming to outsiders. It was extremely difficult, Sarah admitted. I was nearly killed several times. Both governments officially denied my presence, but their ordinary people were curious about humans. They wanted to talk once they trusted me, and they all said the same thing in different ways. They were tired of war. The break ended, and they returned to negotiations. Now they tackled territory, perhaps the most complicated issue. The map was covered with disputed regions, each one soaked in blood and history. We will never surrender the Keyleth system, Zethrak said firmly. It contains our sacred burial grounds. And we cannot abandon the Vorith sector, Yelena replied. It holds resources essential to our survival. Sarah studied the map carefully. What if neither side had to surrender anything? What if you shared instead? Both ambassadors looked at her with confusion. Shared, Zethrak repeated. These are sovereign territories. Sharing is not possible. On Earth, we have many shared regions, Sarah said. Spaces where multiple nations have equal access and responsibility. The key is establishing rules that everyone agrees to follow, with consequences if those rules are broken. She highlighted several areas on the map. What if the Keyleth system remained Vornix sovereign territory, but Kethari were granted permanent pilgrimage rights to a neutral zone? And what if the Vorith sector resources were extracted jointly, with profits split according to need rather than ownership? The ambassadors exchanged glances. This was not how their people thought about territory. Ownership was absolute in their cultures. But the human approach offered something their traditional methods never had, a way forward that didn't require either side to accept total defeat. This would require extensive legal frameworks, Yelena said slowly, enforcement mechanisms, neutral arbitration. Yes, Sarah agreed. That's where the Galactic Council could help. If both empires agreed to accept council oversight of disputed regions for, say, 50 years, it would give trust time to develop between your peoples. Council Representative Shira straightened noticeably. The council had been trying to establish such oversight relationships for centuries, always rejected by both empires. You would accept Galactic Council authority, they asked. Zethrak looked at Yelena. Something passed between them, an understanding that had been impossible 3 days ago. Perhaps, he said carefully, if the terms were acceptable. We would need to see specific proposals, Yelena added, but we are willing to consider it. The council chamber buzzed with whispered conversations. This was already more progress than any previous negotiation had achieved. Ambassador Chen continued pressing forward, building agreement piece by piece. By the end of the third day, they had roughed out solutions for territory and justice. Only reparations remained, and that would be tackled tomorrow. But Sarah knew they had already passed the hardest part. Both ambassadors wanted peace now. They weren't just going through the motions. They were actively working toward a future without war. As the session closed, Yelona approached Sarah directly. "Ambassador Chen, I have a question. Why do humans care so much about our war? Your species has no stake in this conflict. You gain nothing from our peace." Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. When humans first reached the stars, we expected to find peace. Instead, we found the same conflicts we had left behind on Earth, just bigger, more destructive, more hopeless. She paused. We decided that if we couldn't escape violence, maybe we could reduce it. Every war we help end is a war that won't spread to other species, including ours. Zethrak had been listening. "So this is strategic. You fear what our war might become." "Partly," Sarah admitted. "But it's also simpler than that. We've learned that peace is better than war, every time without exception. We want others to learn that too," she smiled. "Call it enlightened self-interest, or call it hope. Either way, we want you to stop killing each other." The ambassadors left the chamber together for the first time. They weren't walking side by side, but they were no longer trying to stay as far apart as possible. Somewhere in the past 3 days, they had stopped being enemies and started being something else. Not friends, not yet, but perhaps someday. The final day of negotiations arrived with tension and hope mixed together in the chamber air. Everyone present knew that reparations were the most dangerous topic. Money and resources carried the weight of every death, every destroyed world, every lost future. Getting this wrong could undo all the progress they had made. Ambassador Chen arrived early, setting up her workspace with careful precision. She had spent most of the night reviewing every possible angle, preparing for objections that might arise. This was the moment where human diplomatic techniques would be tested most severely. Zethrak and Yelona entered together, their body language revealing their anxiety. They had come so far, but both knew their governments were watching. Any agreement they reached would face massive resistance back home. The reparations had to be structured in a way that let both sides claim victory, or at least avoid admitting defeat. "Before we discuss numbers," Sarah began, "I want to establish a principle. Human economics teaches us that the best agreements are those where everyone benefits. We call this positive-sum thinking. The alternative, where one side wins by making the other lose, usually leads to resentment and eventual conflict." Yelona's fur twitched skeptically. "Our economists believe resources are finite. When we gain, they lose. This is simply reality." "It's one reality," Sarah agreed. "But consider this. The money both empires have spent on this war could have funded the colonization of 100 new worlds. The scientists who died could have cured diseases, invented new technologies, solved problems you don't even know exist yet. The real cost of war isn't what you've lost to each other. It's what you've lost together." She projected a new set of numbers on the screen. These weren't casualty figures or territorial maps. They were economic projections, estimates of what both empires could achieve if they redirected their military spending toward development. "These numbers represent wealth that doesn't exist yet but could exist," Sarah explained. "New resources discovered, new technologies developed, new trade relationships established. If we structure reparations around future benefits rather than past losses, everyone can come out ahead." Zethrak studied the projections carefully. His people had always been practical about economics. "You're suggesting that instead of demanding payment for our dead, we should invest together in creating new prosperity." "Exactly. The dead cannot be brought back. The destroyed worlds cannot be rebuilt, but the living can be given better futures. That's what reparations should really be about." The next several hours were spent working through specific proposals. A joint development fund for border regions that had been devastated by fighting. exchange programs that would send young people from each empire to study and work in the other, trade agreements that would create economic interdependence, making future wars too costly to consider. These programs will take decades to implement fully, Yelona noted. Our people expect immediate results. Sarah nodded. That's true. So we also need symbolic gestures that demonstrate good faith, immediate actions that show both populations that their leaders are serious about peace. She pulled out her tablet and displayed a list. I've prepared some options. A joint memorial to all victims of the war, built at a neutral location. The immediate release of all prisoners on both sides. A public apology from each government to the families of civilian casualties. And perhaps most importantly, a state visit where both of you return to your capitals together, demonstrating unity. The ambassadors exchanged uneasy looks. A joint state visit, Zethrak repeated. That would be extremely dangerous. There are factions on both sides that would see it as an opportunity for assassination. Which is why it would be so powerful, Sarah said. If you trust each other enough to take that risk together, your people will see that trust. It will make peace real in a way that documents and agreements cannot. Yelona was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to Zethrak. Would you do it? Would you come to my homeworld and stand beside me, knowing that some of my people want you dead? Zethrak met her three eyes directly. Would you do the same? Would you come to Vorn and face the families of those your fleets killed? Neither spoke for several seconds. The chamber held its breath. Yes, Yelona said finally. I would, because my sister would have wanted me to, because the children in those holograms deserve adults who are brave enough to choose peace. Zethrak's scales shifted to a color Sarah hadn't seen before. Her research team had identified it as the Vornix's expression of profound respect. Then I will do the same, for my son, for all the sons and daughters who never came home. Sarah felt tears threatening to form in her eyes. She pushed them back. The work wasn't done yet. Good, now let's finalize the documents. The remaining hours were spent on details, language, and legal frameworks. The council members watched in amazement as the two ambassadors, who had been unable to be in the same room 3 days ago, now worked together like partners. They argued sometimes, disagreed on specifics, but always found ways to compromise. As the sun set outside the chamber's great windows, the final agreement was ready. It filled hundreds of pages, covering everything from territorial boundaries to trade routes, from war crimes tribunals to cultural exchanges, from immediate prisoner releases to 100-year development plans. It was the most comprehensive peace treaty in the Galactic Council's recorded history. Council Representative Shira approached the signing table with ceremonial gravity. Ambassador Zethrak of the Vornix Empire, Supreme Matriarch Yelona of the Kethari Collective, do you both freely agree to the terms outlined in this document? I do, Zethrak said, his voice steady. I do, Yelona echoed. They each placed their hands on the document, their species equivalent of a signature. Genetic markers embedded in the paper confirmed their identities, making the agreement binding under galactic law. It was done. 300 years of war ended in 3 days. The chamber erupted in applause from the council members. Several species that had been observers rather than participants came forward to offer congratulations. This would be studied for centuries, a model for future negotiations. Ambassador Chen stood to the side, watching the celebration with quiet satisfaction. Her job wasn't quite finished. There would be months of implementation work ahead, but the hard part was over. Two peoples who had seemed determined to destroy each other had chosen a different path. Yelona approached her, moving through the crowd of well-wishers. Ambassador Chen, thank you. Sarah shook her head. You did the hard part. I just helped you see possibilities. No, Yelona insisted. You showed us something more important. You showed us that enemies are not permanent, that the stories we tell ourselves about our enemies are just stories. They can be changed. Zethrak joined them, his massive form cutting through the crowd like a ship through waves. The Vornix Empire is in your debt, Ambassador, a debt we cannot easily repay. Then repay it by making this peace last, Sarah said. Teach your children that war is a choice, not a destiny. Let them grow up knowing that their parents had the courage to stop fighting. Both ambassadors nodded solemnly. They understood. Later that evening, after the official ceremonies and celebrations had ended, Sarah sat alone in her quarters on the human diplomatic vessel. She was exhausted, emotionally drained from days of intense negotiation, but she was also deeply satisfied. Her tablet buzzed with messages from Earth. Other diplomats congratulating her, politicians eager to take credit, journalists requesting interviews. She ignored them all for the moment. There was one person she wanted to talk to first. She activated a communication link, waited for the connection to establish across the vast distances of space. An elderly woman's face appeared on the screen. "Grandmother," Sarah said, "it's done. They signed the treaty." Her grandmother smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening with joy. "I knew you could do it. I always knew. I used the techniques you taught me. The meals, the stories, the gifts, everything the Chen family has learned over 8 generations of diplomacy. Those techniques only work in the right hands," her grandmother said. "You have the gift, Sarah, the ability to see the person behind the enemy. It can't be taught. You either have it or you don't." Sarah thought about the past 3 days, about Zethrak and Yelona and all the pain they carried. They were ready to stop, grandmother. They were so tired of hating each other. They just needed permission to try something different. "That's often how it is," her grandmother agreed. "People get stuck in their stories. They need someone from outside to show them that other stories are possible." The communication continued for a while longer, grandmother and granddaughter discussing the details of the negotiation. But eventually, Sarah said goodbye and signed off. She needed sleep. Tomorrow, the real work of building peace would begin. As she drifted off, Sarah thought about all the other conflicts still burning across the galaxy. Dozens of wars, hundreds of species trapped in cycles of violence they couldn't escape alone. Her work with the Vornix and Kethari was just the beginning. Humans had come to the stars with weapons like everyone else, but they had brought something else too, something that turned out to be more powerful than any weapon. They had brought the hard-won wisdom of a species that had nearly destroyed itself many times over. They had brought the knowledge that peace was always possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. The galaxy was full of ancient empires with advanced technology and powerful militaries, but humanity had something none of them could match. They had 10,000 years of experience in finding ways to stop killing each other, and they were ready to share that experience with anyone willing to learn. Ambassador Sarah Chen slept peacefully that night, knowing that somewhere across the stars, 2 former enemies were doing the same. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts, new opportunities for peace. And humanity would be there, ready to help, armed not with weapons but with stories and meals, and the stubborn belief that any war could be ended if people just remembered how to see each other as people. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not conquest or domination, but the simple, powerful idea that enemies could become friends. That hatred was a choice and could be unchosen, that the future didn't have to be written in blood. 300 years of war ended in 3 days, and this was only the beginning.